So let's talk about what the 8-stage domestic violence homicide timeline is. It has 8 stages. What do they look like? A lot of times things are easier to digest when we look at it through something that is literally taken from headlines we've been seeing floating around and things we have a little bit of understanding of. So today in this video, I am going to talk about Jane Monckton Smith's 8-stage domestic violence timeline. By utilizing this information is taken from places like People Magazine, ABC News, etc. I'm literally taking these from the information that I've gotten from either notes from the trial, things that came out in that, between the uh, alleged victim, his ex-girlfriend, or things that the news has shown, or things that the news has quoted from while he's been dating. And this is not about tearing anybody down, but it's really important for us to be able to see things play out in real life context. When we do that, it makes it easier to understand. Stage 1, Jane describes as a history of stalking and or control behaviors. And it doesn't have to be something that's been founded. The person doesn't have to be arrested for it. Nobody may even know about it. It could be allegations of it. It could be the previous intimate partner's different quotes or things that they've said, but you need to understand that that is stage 1. If you're in a relationship with someone or considering a relationship with someone, beautifuls, and that person has a history of stalking or control, that is what Jane considers stage 1. So in the example that I'm using, there were texts that were revealed in court, and one of them was that he threatened to kill himself basically because she didn't hug him. He described this as not returning the quote love, end quote, he gave her earlier that morning. That's not a history of stalking, but that is a history of controlling behaviors. I wanted you to do this, you didn't do that, maybe I should just kill myself, because that control factor means that she has to act in a certain way. The second example of stage 1 behavior, and remember, stage 1 is a history of stalking or controlling behaviors. This is again another example of controlling behaviors. He told her in these texts that she shouldn't go to the hospital for her injuries because he fears she doesn't understand the protection that their relationship needs. He postured himself in these texts as being important to the Black community, and therefore their behavior needs protection. The controlling factor here is that he is implying that she will be destroying their relationship in some way and therefore being disloyal to him in some way if she does not keep those injuries to herself, if she does not stay away from the public scrutiny of going to the hospital for those injuries. So again, stage 1 is a history of stalking and or controlling behaviors. Those stalking behaviors or controlling behaviors could be a history in your relationship with that person, or it could be a history that they had before you. Either way, it still counts as stage 1 with them. Stage 2 is the commitment whirlwind. So that is when things in the relationship are sped up really, really quickly, 2 or 3 times the speed of what you would expect. They move in together really early. They seem committed to each other really early. They declare their love for each other really early in the relationship. I want to give you some bullet points of his current relationship with the actress. So in March of 2023, the allegations of the violent incident were reported that happened that same month. So violence was reported between he and his ex in March of this year. And that's the same month that the incident happened. In May of this year, so that's only 2 months later, he was seen in public with the actress. Less than 6 months later, in September of this year, now mind you, they were first seen together in May. In September, which was about 4 months later, he was quoted calling her the Mrs. The Mrs. That's pretty early in a 4 month relationship to be calling someone a name that you would call someone you've been married to for a while. Again, that is an example of the commitment whirlwind. So if we're looking at his relationship, his current relationship with the actress, we've already identified stages 1 and 2. And in the comments here, I've already put in links to a video with Jane Monckton Smith. It's a really short video, 3 minutes, where she goes into the different stages in the 8 stage domestic violence homicide timeline. Bear in mind, I'm going through this because if we understand what the stages are, we can disrupt the stages before they get to stage 8. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Stage 3 is living with control, powered by jealousy and loyalty codes. So there's a certain code that you have to live by when you're living under the control of the abuser. That is stage 3. Um, so one of the examples that is a really good example in this case with his ex-girlfriend is that he says to her one night after she came home from a bar with friends, and it was referred to as tipsy, quote, end quote, that she was not living up to the standards set by other spouses. Now, mind you, these two weren't married, they were boyfriend and girlfriend, but that she was not living up to the standards set by famous men, such as the ones that he claims that Coretta Scott King and Michelle Obama are required or were required to live under. In this recording that was released during his recent trial, he could be heard on the recording saying, "I'm a great man, a great man. There needs to be a great woman who makes sacrifices." That quote literally is talking about a loyalty code that he had for her to live by. That loyalty code to a great man, by his own words, was that a great woman needs to make certain sacrifices. Whatever those were that he felt like she should make. When she came home that night from the bar, that was the reason that he supposedly had for his anger and displeasure at her behavior, that she needed to succumb to and thereby change her behavior, which is the control element here, was supposedly that loyalty code. This one had nothing to do with jealousy, but it was a loyalty code. If you're loyal to me and I'm a great man, then you need to accept that with your position as a great woman, certain sacrifices have to happen in your behavioral decisions. So stage 4 is the trigger stage. Something happens that changes the power from the abuser over to the victim. Most times it is brought on by separation from the victim, but there are other ways. So let's look at the way with his ex when he talked about, hey, you know what? She says, I'm going to go to the hospital for the injuries. This being public would change the power dynamic from the abuser over to the victim. This became the trigger. This became the trigger. His career was skyrocketing at this point after some of the movies and other things he had been in. There were a lot of things written in a lot of articles that he was the next up and comer as far as young actors in Hollywood. This going public was the trigger because now that means I don't have the power to do what I'm doing in secret. Now I'm going to be under hyper scrutiny. People are going to be watching me. That changes the power dynamic with you saying what you're going to do, and now I have to change what I'm doing. that shifts the balance of power from him over to her. So now we're in stage 5 of escalation, when the abuser tries to claw back control in the relationship. Sometimes they try to claw back the control, sometimes they just find somebody else, but there's an escalation that happens where the abuser has to do something. In this case, with his ex, he threatened to kill himself. Well, this I must be a monster. Maybe I should just kill myself, etc., etc. When you do that, that shifts the power back because now the victim feels powerless and wants to do anything that they can to make sure that the perpetrator does not go through with suicide because they love the perpetrator and don't want any harm to come to them. When the perpetrator threatens suicide and the victim has to respond to them, it puts the perpetrator back in the seat of control. Believe it or not, we're already in stage 6. He has a switch in thinking. Stage 6 is when the perpetrator decides what they're going to do about losing control. Sometimes they will choose a new victim. Sometimes the victim will go back and then they return to stage 3, which is living under the power and control. Sometimes in stage 6, they will decide to kill. So, in this switch in thinking, what did this actor do? Looks like he got a new person. You see him with the actress since May 23. In September, he's calling her the Mrs. Of course, it remains to be seen as to whether or not he can control her. But if we're talking about how this shifted from one person to another, how the stages ran through with the ex-girlfriend, she got all the way to stage 6. And then he made a decision, right? Stage 6 is the switch in thinking. And in this switch, this actor decided, I'm going to move to a new person, which he did. Just so we understand, stages 7 and 8 look like this. Stage 7 is active planning. This is when they are literally putting steps in motion to kill their victim. So in this case, it looks like maybe it's not going to happen, hopefully, with his ex-girlfriend because of how everything became public. Um, Even if he had put steps in motion, um, it hasn't happened because she's still alive, she's still here. Stage 8 is either homicide or homicide-suicide. So let me back up to stage 7 for a moment. When we talked about actively planning, there are a lot of things that can look like. It can look like the person trying to figure out how they can make this person seem as though they are just a missing person and not deceased, just missing. They may be they may be doing searches on the internet of ways to actually end someone's life, ways to get away with doing that. So stage 7 can look many different ways, purchasing certain items or not purchasing those items. It can look so many different ways, but if they are actively making plans to support stage 8, which is homicide or homicide-suicide, then they are in active stage 7. Stage 8, homicide or homicide-suicide, and that's really important because look back on him saying, maybe I'll just kill myself. We don't know if that was more than um, just him trying to get control back. We don't even know if him saying that was a part of him planning, actively planning. That could have been an active part of stage 7. We don't know. But what we do know is that he did have that switch in thinking and he seems to have moved on to a new person. So as you can see, these are all stages that have behavior that can be tracked. That's the great thing about this timeline of Jane Monckton Smith. how we are going to be using that in this disruptor training is that once we identify how you can uniquely set up your environment for safety for Black women, then we can figure out which stages in this timeline you are best uniquely positioned to disrupt. The more you practice disrupting that safely for her, the better you and your organization become at saving lives. Please click the button below or associated or around this video so that you can sign your organization up for this life-saving breakthrough training. I'm Courageous Fire.